The soft amber glow of candlelight flickered across the mahogany table at Ristorante Palazzo, one of the city's most exclusive Italian restaurants. James Mitchell sat in his tailored charcoal suit, watching his wife Victoria smooth her crimson silk dress as she settled into the leather chair across from him. 23 years of marriage, and she still made his heart skip a beat, or so he thought. "Happy birthday, my love," James whispered, reaching across the table to take her hand. Victoria's smile was radiant, almost too radiant. He noticed a slight hesitation before her fingers met his. It lasted only a millisecond, but James felt it. The restaurant was packed with the city's elite, bankers, lawyers, entrepreneurs. James had reserved the best table by the window, overlooking the glittering city skyline. Victoria had insisted on coming here specifically, which he found slightly odd since she usually preferred the quieter Italian place across town. "The ambiance here is just special," she'd said 2 weeks ago, her voice carrying an unfamiliar breathlessness. Throughout their marriage, James had built a successful architecture firm, while Victoria had become a respected interior designer. They lived in a Victorian mansion in the upscale Riverside district, drove luxury cars, and vacationed in the Mediterranean each summer. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, enviable, stable, complete. But lately, something had shifted. Victoria had been working late more often, taking more client meetings, changing clothes more frequently. She'd become more conscious of her appearance, her body, the way she styled her hair. James had attributed it to a rejuvenation phase, nothing sinister. Everyone reinvented themselves occasionally. "I ordered the bottle of Barolo you love," James said, watching as the sommelier poured the dark wine into their crystal glasses. "The 2015 vintage. It's supposed to be exceptional this year." Victoria took a sip, her dark eyes, which he had always found mesmerizing, scanning the restaurant with an intensity he couldn't quite place. She seemed distracted, nervous even. Her manicured fingers twisted her diamond wedding ring round and round, a nervous habit she'd developed over the past few months. "It's perfect," she murmured, but her gaze had drifted to the restaurant entrance. James squeezed her hand gently. "You look absolutely stunning tonight. That dress is new, isn't it?" "Yes," Victoria replied quickly. Perhaps too quickly. "Do you like it?" "You're beautiful in everything. You always have been." He meant it sincerely. Even after more than 2 decades, he found her physically attractive. The curve of her neck, the way her dark hair cascaded down her back, the elegance in her movements. As they clinked glasses, James noticed Victoria's phone vibrate in her clutch on the table. He quickly silenced it, but not before he caught the nervous flick of her eyes toward it. In that moment, a whisper of doubt crept into his mind, like shadows lengthening as sunset approaches. The appetizers arrived, burrata and heirloom tomatoes, pan-seared scallops. The restaurant buzzed with elegant conversation and the soft murmur of classical music. James tried to push away his nagging sense of unease, focusing instead on his wife's face, trying to remember the last time they'd truly laughed together. Then he noticed something else. Victoria's left ankle bore a faint red mark, like a pressure mark from something or someone holding her tightly. It was barely visible, hidden partly by her heels, but James had seen her skin 1,000 times before. He knew every mole, every freckle, every scar. "Victoria," he started to say, pointing to her ankle. But before he could finish, the waiter approached their table, a young man, impeccably dressed, carrying a pristine white plate with their main courses. His expression was polite, professional, but as he set down Victoria's pasta, he paused. "Madame, is the other husband coming too?" The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade, suspended at the exact moment before it falls. Time seemed to stop. James felt his hand freeze mid-motion, his wineglass suspended between the table and his lips. The ambient restaurant sounds, the gentle clink of silverware, the murmur of conversations, the soft strings of Vivaldi, all seemed to fade into a distant hum. Victoria's face drained of color.
Her fork clattered against her plate. She looked at the waiter with an expression of pure terror, her eyes widening until James could see the whites around her irises. What? She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The waiter's professional facade cracked slightly. He looked between them, confusion and embarrassment flooding his features. I'm sorry, The reservation was under Mrs. Mitchell and Mr. Davidson. We have a standing reservation for 2 on Friday nights, and I assumed—" He trailed off, realization dawning on his face that he just made a catastrophic mistake. I apologize, I've made a terrible error." But it was too late. The damage was done. James set down his glass with deliberate slowness, the crystal making a soft clink against the marble table. His jaw tightened. "What did he just say?" Victoria couldn't look at him. She was staring at her untouched pasta, her hands trembling visibly now. Her breathing had become shallow, rapid. A bead of sweat formed at her temple despite the restaurant's cool air conditioning. "James, she began, but her voice cracked on his name. "A standing reservation for 2 on Friday nights." James heard his own voice, cold and distant, as if it belonged to someone else. He was experiencing that strange, dissociative moment when shocking reality doesn't immediately feel real, like watching yourself in a movie rather than living the scene. The waiter, mortified, excused himself quickly and disappeared into the kitchen. But it was too late. The bomb had detonated. Victoria finally looked at her husband, and James saw genuine anguish in her eyes, but beneath it he detected something else. Not just guilt. Resignation, perhaps, as if some part of her had been expecting this moment, dreading it, but also strangely relieved that the performance was finally over. "His name is Richard," she said quietly. "Richard Davidson. He's a partner at Thompson & Associates. He works in the financial sector." Each word was a fresh wound. James felt his chest constricting, his vision narrowing. The beautiful restaurant suddenly felt suffocating, the candlelight harsh and accusatory. "How long?" His voice was barely a whisper. Victoria's fingers twisted that wedding ring again, round and round. 2 years. It started 2 years ago. 2 years. 2 full years of memories and shared moments suddenly reframed, recontextualized, revealed as lies. All those times she'd worked late. Had she been with him? All those new clothes, the meticulous grooming, the way she had become suddenly concerned with her fitness routine, all of it had been for another man. And the waiter knowing about Mr. Davidson, a standing reservation, James pressed, though part of him wanted to flee, to go home and pretend this wasn't happening. Victoria's silence was answer enough. She and Richard have been coming here together every Friday night for who knows how long, sitting at this very restaurant, perhaps at this very table, being intimate in ways that James and Victoria hadn't been in years. He usually reserves under his name. I came early tonight, before you arrived, to talk to the management, to ask them to put the reservation under both our names just for tonight, because I wanted—" She paused, her voice breaking. "I wanted to end it. I wanted to tell you today, on your birthday, that I'd chosen you, that I was ending things with Richard." "You wanted to tell me? On my birthday?" James repeated flatly. "How thoughtful! So what? You were going to confess everything while we're surrounded by waiters and the entire Riverside elite?" "I didn't know how else to—" "Were you intimate with him? Here at this restaurant?" James asked, the question tumbling out before he could stop it. Victoria's continued silence, the way her eyes flickered toward the restroom corridor, told him everything he needed to know. His wife had been with another man in the back restrooms of this restaurant. How many times? Once? Dozens? The thought made bile rise in his throat. Around them, the other diners had begun to notice the tense tableau. A woman at the nearby table was discreetly glancing over, her expression a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. James suddenly felt utterly exposed, aware that their private devastation was becoming a spectacle for strangers. "We need to leave," he said, standing abruptly. "Now." Victoria grabbed his wrist. "James, please, I love you. I ended it. I sent Richard a message this morning telling him I couldn't see him anymore, that I was choosing our marriage, that—" "You ended it this morning?" After 2 years, James yanked his arm free. Victoria, you didn't end an affair on a whim. You had plans, arrangements, an entire double life. You were only ending it because you got caught. He threw cash on the table, far too much, enough to cover the meal 3 times over, and walked toward the exit without looking back. Behind him, he heard Victoria's chair scrape against the floor as she stood to follow him, heard her heels clicking rapidly on the marble, heard her voice calling his name through tears. But James kept walking, pushing through the glass doors into the cool night air, finally understanding that the comfortable life he had built with Victoria had been built on sand, and that the tide had just come in.
The apartment they'd shared for 23 years suddenly felt like a crime scene. James moved through the rooms in a daze, seeing everything with new, suspicious eyes. The bedroom, where he'd made love to his wife countless times, where they'd laughed and held each other, now felt contaminated. Victoria had followed him home, her pleas echoing through the car ride, but James had driven in complete silence, the radio off, only the hum of the engine and the sound of her ragged breathing filling the space between them. Now, as he paced the mahogany-floored living room, he felt like an actor who'd suddenly realized the play he was starring in had been a tragedy all along. "I need you to tell me everything," James said coldly, positioning himself by the fireplace. "And I want the truth, not the version designed to minimize damage, the complete, unfiltered truth." Victoria sat on the edge of their cream-colored sofa, still wearing that crimson dress that now looked like a symbol of betrayal. Her makeup was smudged from crying, her hair disheveled. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. "His name is Richard Davidson. He's 48, divorced, has 2 children from his previous marriage," she began, her voice hollow. "I met him at the Morrison conference 2 years ago. Do you remember? I went for that interior design symposium." James did remember. Victoria had gone alone for a week in April. He'd stayed home to oversee a major project renovation. She'd come back energized, talking about design trends and networking opportunities. He'd been happy for her. Happy. The word felt obscene now. We were at the same panel discussion. He was there for a financial seminar that was running parallel. We got coffee afterward, just coffee. I swear, that first day was innocent. Victoria's voice wavered. But then he kept texting, said he wanted to continue discussing design philosophy, said I was brilliant, creative, that he'd never met anyone like me. James felt something ugly twist in his chest. He'd stopped telling Victoria she was brilliant months ago. Their conversations had become functional, logistics about the house, gossip about mutual friends, discussions about bills and schedules. When had he stopped making her feel special? "It took 3 weeks," Victoria continued, "before anything physical happened. He invited me to lunch at a hotel restaurant. We sat in the bar area, and when no one was looking, he held my hand. Just held it. James, I felt alive for the first time in years." "Don't," James warned, but Victoria pressed on. "After that first kiss, it became harder to stop. We started meeting every Friday afternoon. I told you I was going to client meetings. Sometimes I did have meetings, but usually I was with Richard. We'd check into the Ambassador Hotel, room 412, always the same room, and we'd—" She paused, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "We'd make love for hours. He would touch every part of me, and I would feel like I mattered, like I was desired, like I was enough." James turned away from her, pressing his forehead against the cold mantle. He couldn't bear to hear the details. Yet he needed to hear them, needed to understand exactly how thoroughly he'd failed her, even as she had failed him. "Did you love him?" The question came out as a hoarse whisper. "I thought I did, or I thought I could learn to," Victoria admitted. "But it was more complicated than that. It wasn't just physical attraction, though God knows that was intoxicating after so many years without passion between us. Richard made me feel seen. He asked about my dreams. He listened when I talked about my frustrations with my career. He wanted to know every detail about my childhood, my fears, my secrets." She stood up and approached him, her hands trembling. "He knew my body better than you did. He knew exactly where to touch me, exactly how to make me climax,
Exactly what words would make me weak. Yes, I was intimate with him, not just at the restaurant, but everywhere. We rented a small apartment across town under false names. We spent entire afternoons there, and he would— "Stop!" James commanded. But Victoria was now pouring out years of suppressed truth, her confession becoming almost frenzied. He would tie me to the bed sometimes, he'd blindfold me and make me wait, making me anticipate what he'd do next. He'd use ice, feathers, silk scarves. He made me feel like I was 25 again, wild and desired and worthy of being wanted. And every single time I hated myself for wanting him, for needing that from someone who wasn't my husband. James felt like he might vomit. His wife, this woman he'd built a life with, had been systematically, deliberately deceiving him while experiencing a version of intimacy that apparently he had never been able to provide. And the worst part? Part of him understood why. When had their sex life become so predictable, so perfunctory? When had making love to Victoria become just another item on his to-do list? "Why now?" he finally asked. "Why tell me now, on today of all days?" Victoria's tears flowed freely now. "Because Richard wanted me to leave you. He wanted me to divorce you and move in with him. Start a new life. He's been pressuring me for months, and today he finally gave me an ultimatum. He said if I didn't ask for a divorce by this weekend, he was going to tell you himself." "He was going to blackmail you?" James' voice was sharp with a new kind of anger. "He was going to set you free," Victoria said bitterly. "That's what he called it. But I realized, James, when he pushed me to choose, I realized that despite everything, despite all my doubts about us, I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose this life we built. And more than that, I realized that what I felt for Richard was intoxication and escape, not love. Real love is what we have, or what I hope we can still have." "What you hope we can still have?" James laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Victoria, you've been deceiving me for 2 years. You've been systematically lying to my face, sleeping with another man in some apartment you rented under a fake name, allowing him to touch you in ways I never—" His voice broke. "Everything I thought I knew about you, about us, about our marriage has been a lie." He moved toward the bedroom. "I can't be here right now. I can't even look at you." "Where are you going?" Victoria called after him. "I don't know, but I need space. I need time to figure out if there's anything left of this marriage worth saving or if it's already completely destroyed."
Victoria returned from Italy 3 days before she was supposed to. I was working from home when I heard the key in the lock, and my heart performed an acrobatic flip. Early return. What did that mean? She emerged through the door with 2 massive suitcases, her skin glowing with an Italian tan, her eyes bright with unshed tears, or perhaps joy. I couldn't immediately tell which. "Hi," she said simply. I stood up from my desk, suddenly uncertain. "Hi yourself. What are you doing home?" "I cut it short," she said, wheeling her luggage inside and closing the door. "I was in Rome and I realized something." My chest clenched. Here it was. The moment she was going to tell me that she'd realized she preferred being alone, that the freedom tasted too good to give up. "I realized," she continued, stepping closer to me, "that traveling alone was incredible, that I needed it, that I learned so much about myself." She paused, and a smile broke across her face. "But I also realized that I don't want to experience every good thing in my life alone. I want someone to remember Rome with me. I want someone to share it with." "Victoria, let me finish," she interrupted. "I met someone there, an artist from Barcelona. She was incredible, and we had the most interesting conversations about art and life and freedom. And I realized that maybe the freedom I thought I wanted wasn't freedom from you. It was freedom to be myself with you." She reached up and touched my face, her fingers gentle. "I spent 10 days learning who I am when no one is watching. And you know what? I like her. I like who I am. And I like even more who I am when I'm with you, because you're not trying to change her. You're supporting her." I kissed her then, unable to wait for more words, my hands tangling in her hair, my body communicating what I couldn't articulate.
She tasted like travel and possibility, and something fundamentally changed. We made our way upstairs without breaking contact, a trail of luggage and travel clothes left in our wake. We tumbled into our bed, and she made love to me with an urgency and passion that felt different, more deliberate, more chosen, more authentically her. Afterward, she told me stories about the museums and the midnight gelato runs, and the moment she sat alone by the Trevi fountain and realized that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. About how she'd journaled about our relationship and come to understand that she hadn't been shrinking to fit into my life. She'd been shrinking because she was afraid of being too much. I thought if I stayed small enough, I couldn't disappoint you. I thought if I didn't want too much or be too loud, you'd stay. But you just kept making space for me instead. That's what you do when you love someone. You make space. But you didn't just make space. You insisted on it. You pushed me into my own life almost forcefully. Do you know how rare that is? A partner who wants you to be bigger, not smaller? Over the following weeks, everything shifted. Victoria returned to her job reinvigorated, sometimes working late, but always seeming fully present. She started the novel she'd talked about for 3 years. She took solo trips every few months, never longer than a week, but enough to keep her feeling connected to herself. And somewhere in the space we'd created, our marriage became something richer. The kind of partnership where two whole people were choosing each other, not two half people completing each other.
6 months after Italy, I planned something. It wasn't grand, and it wasn't about reclaiming her or proving that she was ultimately mine. It was about celebrating what we'd built. I arranged it carefully. Victoria had mentioned wanting to renew our vows, not because our marriage was broken, but because the version we'd created was so different from the version we'd promised. It was bigger, braver, more honest. I didn't tell her. Instead, I coordinated with Emma to get her to the botanical garden on a Saturday afternoon under the guise of a casual hangout. When she arrived, she was wearing jeans and a simple white linen shirt, no makeup, her hair in a braid, utterly herself. And then she rounded the corner of the rose garden and saw me standing there in a simple suit, and beyond me, the 30 people we loved most, and she went absolutely still. Her hand flew to her mouth. "What is this?" she whispered, already moving toward me. "I wanted to do something," I began, taking her hands as our families and closest friends gathered around us. "I wanted to stand in front of everyone we love and make new promises. Not the ones we made 8 years ago when we were different people. Promises for who we are now." I pulled a piece of paper from my jacket pocket, actual paper, not vows I'd memorized, because I wanted her to know I'd taken time and care with this. "I promise," I read, my voice steady, "to keep making space for you to be yourself, to celebrate your independence, not fear it, to love not the version of you that fits into my life, but the full, authentic, uncompromised version of you. I promise to remember that loving you doesn't mean owning you, that devotion doesn't require possession." I paused, looking at her face, which was streaming with tears. "I promise," I continued, "that even on the hard days, I'll choose the woman who needs her freedom more than she needs my certainty. And I promise to remember that that woman, that fierce, beautiful, alive woman, she chose me back." Victoria made a small, broken sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I don't have vows," she managed, shaking her head. "I didn't know. I'm not prepared." "You don't have to be," I said. "Just tell me what you feel." She was quiet for a moment, and then she stepped closer, her hands gripping my lapels. "I feel like I've been living my entire adult life waiting to wake up to the person who would let me be myself. I thought that person would have to be me, alone. I thought freedom and partnership were mutually exclusive. But you proved they aren't. You proved that the deepest love is the kind that doesn't diminish anyone, that expands them." She placed her hand over my heart. "I promise to never again apologize for wanting more experiences, more of myself, more of life. I promise to remember that your trust in my freedom is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. And I promise she trailed off, smiling through tears. I promise that even though I now know I could be happy alone, I'm choosing actively, consciously, every single day to build this life with you. Not because I'm afraid of being alone, because being with you makes me braver. Then she kissed me, and when she pulled back, she was utterly speechless herself, just staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Later that evening, after the celebration and the cake and the toasts from friends, we drove home in comfortable silence. At a red light, she took my hand. She said, "I want to tell you something I've never told anyone." "What's that?" "When I told Emma I didn't want to remarry if we ever divorced, I was lying. Or maybe I wasn't lying exactly, but I was telling a half-truth. What I really meant was that I didn't want to marry someone who couldn't let me be free. And I think somewhere deep down, I was testing whether you could be that person." "Did I pass?" I asked, pulling her hand to my lips. She said, with flying colors. She said, "You didn't just pass the test, you rewrote the whole framework of how I understood love." That night, we made love slowly and tenderly, without urgency or possession. Just two people who knew exactly how rare and precious it was to be completely, authentically themselves and still choose each other. When she fell asleep against my chest, I lay awake for a while, thinking about how close I'd come to making her my captive instead of my partner. The secret she'd been afraid to tell me had freed us both. And in the darkness of our bedroom, I smiled, grateful for the overheard conversation that had changed everything. Sometimes love isn't about holding tighter. Sometimes it's about having the courage to let go and the wisdom to know that the person who comes back, fully and freely, is the one worth keeping forever. The vow we'd made that day, surrounded by everyone we loved, wasn't about staying together despite our individuality. It was about staying together because of it. Because we'd finally learned that the truest intimacy wasn't possession, it was permission.